So you have seen many works presentation on models of dynamics in small, large portion of the brain, such as the ones Gianni and Chiara have shown before. So today my focus will be slightly different. I will focus on the cognitive performance of biological networks of neurons and on biologically plausible learning rules for this network. And I promise you a bridge at the end of the talk if I have time, yeah. So why is that even interesting? No? So I believe the two obvious reasons are the following. So first, biological networks are really efficient in terms of energy, time required to learn a task, the data required to learn a task, and actually artificial intelligence can really be improved by taking inspiration from biological intelligence. Second point, actually we don't really know what are the rules governing learning in biological networks, right? So reasoning in terms of theoretical principles, first principles, can really help understanding also biological intelligence. And I will try to make you some examples in the course of my talk. So let's start from this condition, this situation. We have a recurrent network of spiking neurons. Okay, this is an example of the activity. Then we have an output of the network, which is just defined as a linear readout of the activity of the network. And these continuous lines are the output, okay? So now let's imagine a very simple task. We want this network to reproduce as an output a specific trajectory, a specific behavior, okay? To memorize this dashed line, this trajectory. So one very common way to train this network to do so is to write a cost function, in this case an error between the target activity and the current activity, squared error. And then if you are good enough to differentiate this, you can write the derivative as respect to the parameters of the networks, in this case the recurrent weights of the network. And then you can update weights to lower this error, okay? So this is the, you can, if you can do this, you can explicitly write the plasticity rule here. So first I want to show you that this is effective, this works. You can see that the dynamics at the end of the learning is changed to reproduce the target output, and the output is pretty well reproduced, okay? So this works. Okay. Actually, let's give a closer look to the learning rule, right? So what is required here to this? First of all, it is required to propagate the error for each time to the network, okay? So you need to propagate the difference between the target and what you are producing at a specific time. And then this should be projected to the network with a specific kernel. And this matrix is the same as the readout matrix, okay? So you have very specific requirement for this learning rule. And is that even plausible? Is it plausible to ask to project at every time the difference between, so it's not clear whether this is plausible. So that's why, so this is what is called error-based approach. Okay, you start from an error and propagate the error to the network. And this requires a very specific spatiotemporal structure of the error that should be propagated. So the fact that it is not clear whether this is plausible led us to consider an alternative approach which is called target-based approach. So let's consider the same task, and I will show you that it's not necessary to propagate the error, but just the target you want. So what you can do is the following. You project the target trajectories to the network, okay? What happens is that the untrained network produces a pattern, an internal pattern of spikes, okay? This will be used as the proposed internal solution of the task, okay? So what we do now is we take another network and we update ways to maximize the likelihood that this specific pattern is produced in this network even when the teaching signal is no longer present, okay? So this doesn't require the propagation of an error. However, it requires the presence of two networks, okay? This is a problem I will discuss better in a few slides. But for now, let's keep this process, okay? So what the learning rule is doing here is just trying to reproduce in this network the target activity, okay? So in the previous approach, in the error-based approach, the internal solution was iteratively adjusted to minimize the error, while in this case, the internal solution is directly proposed to the network, okay? If we look at the comparison between these two approaches, we can see a very faster convergence to a good solution for the target-based approach, and even a convergence to a very, very lower error. Is more than 1 order of magnitude less. Okay, so actually this approach is pretty good. It's working pretty well for this specific task. Okay, and now I'm putting these two approaches in this table here. I'm listing pros and cons. However, I have shown you a very simple task, okay? I just show you an open loop task. I propose a trajectory and I want to store this temporal trajectory. However, our approach, target-based approach, can be generalized even to very more general tasks. And just giving you an example here, this has already been shown a little bit by Mino yesterday. So consider having a bidimensional maze. The network is controlling the agent in this maze, and the agent should first push a button to unlock the food and then reaching for the food. So the reason why we designed this task is that we didn't want a purely reactive task. We didn't want something which was just the network receives an input and produces an output. We wanted something which was more temporal, difficult somehow. Indeed, in this case, the agent has to remember that it already pushed the button, for example, and then to go to reach the food. This task requires retaining some working memory in time, also for a very long time for reaching the food, sometimes. So to solve this task, the approach we took is a imitation learning framework, in particular behavioral cloning. And we have shown several demonstrations from an expert solving the task. So for example, starting from here, going to the button, which is always in the same position, and then going to the food in several final position. And actually, starting from this very small number of examples, the agent is pretty capable to generalize the task. I can show you an example of the solution of the task. Okay, this is the activity controlling the agent, and the agent is capable to push the button, then reaching for the food. So this works pretty well. Actually, it is possible to generalize on the position of the food, but it is not very good in generalizing on the position of the button. So this task is pretty challenging, and the network in this moment is not able to generalize really well every possible condition of the task. Okay, so I've shown you a pretty good framework for learning, which has provides several advantages. However, we have very strong limitations. For example, it requires 2 independent networks, which is not really biologically plausible. And second, in some tasks, is not capable to generalize pretty well. So what can be a solution? A solution can be replacing the paradigm, replacing the single neurons in the network with more complex neurons. So what's the point here? The point is that most of the learning approaches uses neurons which are point neurons. As also Gianni has shown, usually neurons are a point which integrates all the inputs together in one single point, and then the membrane potential is affected, and then it produces a spike. However, this is very far from biological reality, and we would like to take inspiration from biology to put more complex neurons and see whether this provides advantages. So indeed, in biology, neurons are not point neurons. They have very complex structure. This is an example from pyramidal neurons from layer 3 or layer 5 of the cortex. And for example, different branches of neurons sample from neurons tuned on different orientations, for example. Or even, depending on how the inputs are provided to the branches, in the same branch or different branches, the summation can be linear or nonlinear. So these are just a couple of examples of what dendritic computation, how complex it can be. You can see many other, for example, in this amazing review here. However, the mechanism we are really interested in is this very famous mechanism, this coincidence between inputs in basal and apical dendrites. And when there is only a basal input, a spike is produced, but when there is a coincidence between the two inputs, a burst is produced. So something which is inspired, just for completeness, I want to mention that something which is inspired to this mechanism has already been proposed to implement biologically plausible back propagation in this paper. However, this is still an error-based approach. So for this reason, we wanted to exploit this specific pyramidal neuron structure to propose a target-based approach. I will fill this box of the table in a moment. So this is the structure of the neuron we proposed. Okay, I have a somatic body, and I have apical compartments. Okay, so if the soma is receiving an input, it's capable to produce a spike here. Okay, after this, a window is open. This zeta squared, let's say. Okay, if in this window an apical spike is produced, then a burst is initiated. Okay, this can be written pretty well, described by the initiation of the burst by this variable, right? Sorry. As the product between the window, which is 1 in this time period, and A. A is the spike. A is 1 when the apical spike is produced. So this is the definition of the burst. This is a product. It's a coincidence between the two events. So now we have two classes of bursts. Indeed, we have two apical compartments, a proximal and a distal one. So the distal one receives the signal from other areas of the cortex, receive the teaching signal, while the proximal one receives recurrent connection from the other neurons of the networks. Indeed, I'm sketching one neurons, but of course this is a network of recurrently connected neurons. Okay, so this compartment is receiving the inputs from other neurons. Okay, so this class of burst is produced by the recurrent connections, while this star class of burst is produced by this other compartment. Okay, the learning rule we proposed here is this one. So basically, the burst produced by the recurrent network should match the B star, the burst produced by the teaching signal. Okay, so in this way, when I provide the teaching signal, I define a pattern of burst, which should be mimicked by the recurrent network even when the teaching signal will no longer be there. Okay. I can use this approach to solve the same task I've shown you before, okay? But in this case, I don't need anymore the two networks, okay? So this neurons is doing the two jobs, okay? So this apical compartment receives a random projection of the target, which is the dashed line here. And in the training phase, these weights, the recurrent weights, are learning to mimic this pattern of bursts defined by the teaching signal. When the teaching signal will no longer be there, the network will be able to recall the trajectory learned in this phase by reproducing this pattern of burst learned during the training phase. Okay, so the blue points are showing the pattern of burst internal to the network activity. So actually, this mechanism can be used for really several purposes. For example, if I have more than one learned trajectories, I have two independent trajectories, okay, the red one and the black one. I can use a signal projected to this apical compartment to select the memory, to produce with the same sensory input, let's say. So if I provide this black, okay, context here, I will follow, you see, the black dashed line, while if I provide this other contextual selection, I will follow the red line. So this architecture here can also be used as a contextual selection. And the same can be used to compose cortical architecture. So in this case, we use two different networks, and the high network is producing an output which is projected to the low network as a contextual selection. Okay. So I'm going back to this button and foot task, which was not solved very well before. But in this case, we can take a hierarchical approach where the high network learns the general strategy. Okay. So learns that first it should reach the button. So it is this first phase, and then it should reach the foot. Okay. So the high network learns to reproduce this signal, projects this signal to the low network, which produce the burst required for the motor activation. And this is the solution of the task, for example. The network starts from here, reaches the button, and then the food. Here I have a few examples, so you can see it generalizes on the position of the different position of the food, different position of the button. This is the result is really stable. You can see here the switch of the contextual signal produced by the high network in time. And actually, the performance are the maximum performance is 1, the performance is pretty good. And in this plot, I want to show you that this kind of architecture is really required to solve the task. Indeed, whether if the high network projects to the low compartment rather than the high compartment, the performance are much poorer. So this is to show you that to tell you that the implementation of hierarchical policy is really improved in this kind of architecture. Okay, so basically this is the complete table, and my take message would be usually standard approaches are really constrained in using very simple ingredients such as point-like neurons and error-based learning rule. And I want to challenge to reasoning about different and more biologically inspired and more complex paradigm to learn and improve biological intelligence. So now I would like to give you a little bridge with the simulation of the dynamics of populations of neurons. So now you have this machinery, which is telling you how to train this network. For example, the first 10 neurons of a network are trained to reproduce this specific pattern of bars. Okay, this bar. So this is a temporal series I'm teaching to this network with the method I showed you before. And this is the dynamics of 10 different membrane potentials. The first 10 neurons. Okay, bars, and teaching a sequence. Okay, so sorry, I couldn't resist. As pointed out by many of us, adaptation is very important, right? So if you have done your homework, you know how to set the parameters of a population of neurons to reproduce slow oscillation, right? So yeah, so what we can do, so we can embed these 10 neurons in a network of 500 neurons, for example. I can set recurrent connectivity and adaptation to reproduce slow oscillation like this. But what is interesting here is that you give a closer look to the structure of these dynamics. You will see a replay, okay, a replay in spikes of the same sequence learned while awake, okay. And actually, this feature is very well documented in the data, where it is observed that the sequences learned as a sequence of bars while awake are reproduced as sequence of spikes during sleep. Actually, even at a very faster time scale, which is also the case in this example. Very last thing I want to mention that we are trying to go beyond pure associative effects observed during deep sleep, and we want to understand whether in other sleep phases there can be a production of new information. As maybe Jon mentioned yesterday, the brain has an understanding of the world, right? So this is why we are proposing these two network models, an agent and a model network. So while awake, this model is so this part of the network is learning how to behave in an environment. For example, learning playing Pong, and this other network is learning how to understand, how to model the world. And during dreaming, the model can replace the environment to keep making new experiences and to learn and refine its skills even when the environment is no longer available. And I would just like to show that actually this really, this is when the dreaming is on. This approach also makes faster the learning and the efficiency in terms of the data required to obtain a desirable policy to interact in an environment.
Sorry, Cristiano, what are the labels of the axis there?
Here? No.
Panel C, D, E.
No, this is just the sketch.
No, the
See, here, okay. This is the number. This is the number of iterations with the environment. So this is 40, but each one is 500 iterations with their environment. Is one temporal frame. So this is the number of temporal frames. So basically, you have this Pong game, and each temporal frame is one in this plot here. So every time you interact with the environment, you are updating a little bit your policy. You are improving a little bit. And this is a reinforcement learning framework I'm using. And usually reinforcement learning is very, very slow in learning a policy in this kind of environments. So the point here is that after I have learned in the environment, maybe I can learn a little bit more by dreaming of that game, by introducing new experiences, interacting not with the environment, but with my inner model of the environment. So that's why I am increasing the data efficiency in this plot here. So this is the number of data required, okay? And this number is smaller if you also dream a little bit. Okay, so I want to thank all my collaborators, the lab, and you for your attention. And if you have any question, please don't hesitate to contact me. And yeah.